Welcome, everyone. We're going to give it a few minutes to let people come into the webinar. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to give it one more minute and then we're going to get started with this webinar. Thank you for joining us. All right, it's 11:03. I see our attendee numbers are slowing down, so I'll get us started here. Welcome everyone to this webinar today, sharing some guidance, information, and stellar examples of incorporating workforce development into your projects funded by the Conservancy. I'm Evan Borgness-Sloan. I'm the Deputy Manager of our San Francisco Bay program. And for the Conservancy, I'm also joined by Marilyn Latta and Erica Johnson, who are project managers in our San Francisco Bay program, who will be helping advancing slides and monitoring the Q&A and chat. Next slide. In today's webinar, we will start by highlighting a new guidance document that the Conservancy has created to help jumpstart workforce development in your projects. Then we will move to 4 speakers to highlight stellar examples of working with systematically excluded communities in Bayview Hunters Point on projects and on an equitable development plan in Indian Basin in San Francisco. Our speakers include David Froelich and Josh Silver from San Francisco Rec and Park, Janet Gomez from San Francisco's Office of Economic and Workforce Development, and Jackie Flynn from the Philip Randolph Institute. There will be time for Q&A after each presentation, as well as at the end of all of the presentations. So please put your questions in the Q&A box in Zoom. Next slide. So first, I'd like to highlight that the Conservancy is striving to support more projects that integrate workforce development. In our 2023 to 2027 strategic plan, our very first goal is to prioritize equity in our projects with a sub-goal 1.4 specifically focused on workforce development. While workforce development activities are not always a requirement of a grant with the Coastal Conservancy, providing pathways for workers from local communities to become expertly trained in ecological restoration and paid a living wage will ensure that the state's money is well spent and our projects are successful and have the highest local benefits. And that's why we're here today. We want to do our best in supporting our current and future grantees with developing workforce programming. Next slide. So the Conservancy, as I mentioned, has developed a quick 6-page guidance document to help grantees start thinking about how to best incorporate workforce development into your projects. To find that document, you can go to our website, scc.ca.gov, and under grants, And under resources for grantees, you'll find our grantee manual that has a whole slew of information about a grant, managing our grant with the Coastal Conservancy. But if you navigate to page 12, there's a link to our tip sheet, and it's called Tips for Equitable Workforce Development. Next slide. So I'm just going to highlight some key recommendations from the tip sheet, but really the bulk of the webinar is to introduce our next 4 speakers. So first, the tip sheet recommends that you can hire your local or state conservation corps. Conservation corps provide job skills training and educational opportunities for young adults ages 18 to 26 while preserving and protecting the environment. Several conservation corps have worked on many Coastal Conservancy projects, typically helping grantees with on-the-ground activities such as invasive species removal, revegetation, brush clearing, trash and recycling pickup, trail and fence building, oyster reef fabrication, etc. To hire a conservation corps, navigate to Hire a Crew on the following websites. Next, you can work with the Ecological Workforce Initiative, which is developing a training program for construction workers focused on ecological skills needed to work in areas that have stringent permit requirements due to endangered species and sensitive habitats. Next, in California, public works projects require workers to be paid a prevailing wage, which is a wage determined by the state based on the type of work done and the location. If you as a grantee determine, we would recommend with legal counsel, that prevailing wage is not required, you can still pay prevailing wage voluntarily, or at a minimum, you should be paying workers a living wage, which is above minimum wage and varies by jurisdiction. Next, you can develop apprenticeship programs and hire apprentices on construction and restoration projects. For organizations with apprenticeship opportunities, you can find eligible candidates by connecting with the California Workforce Development Board with their High Road Construction Careers program. Next, you could consider developing a project labor agreement or community benefits agreement for large public work projects. A project labor agreement, or PLA, provides assurances for workers regarding job conditions and assurances for project owners on timely completion. PLAs can also be rolled into broader community benefits agreements as a part of a more comprehensive approach to negotiating labor, job training, housing, amenities, and other social economic benefits to local communities who stand to gain from the public project. Next, you can use targeted contracting preferences to increase equity and diversity. The state of California has established several contractor hiring preferences to support targeted communities, and our tip sheet provides some examples. Next, you can hire employees locally when possible, and check if the city you're working in requires it via a local hiring ordinance. Next, you can partner with organizations that have internship programs. Many nonprofits, tribes, public agencies, community-based organizations, community colleges, and even private companies have such internships. And with that, I am happy to turn it over to David. Oh, wait, we're going to do Q&A after each. I'm sorry about that. Erica, are there any questions in the chat? And we can give it a minute if we have time for people to put any questions about our tip sheet.
I don't see any yet, Evan.
And if you have a question, please remember to put it in the Q&A or in the chat. I see one hand got raised, but I don't believe we have the ability to unmute folks. All right, well, we're going to have more questions at the end, so feel free to put it in the chat and we can definitely circle back. Take it away, David.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is David Froelich, and I'm a project manager with Rec and Park, San Francisco Rec and Park Capital and Planning Division, and I'm the project manager for the India Basin Waterfront Park project. Our project has 4 project partners: Trust for Public Land, San Francisco Parks Alliance, APRI, the A. Philip Randolph Institute, and then also, obviously, Rec and Park. India Basin is located in the Bay of San Francisco. It's on the southeast quadrant of the city. just down the road from the Hunters Point Naval Shipyard. Next. The India Basin Waterfront Park is comprised of two parcels. 900 Innes is a parcel that the city acquired in 2014. We had a remediation project on that site, and then next door is the India Basin Shoreline Park. Once complete, it'll be a 10-acre park that is going to be called the India Basin Waterfront Park. Next. Our design goals for the project were mostly access and connection, community program needs, equitable development plan goals, which our project partners will talk about in the next slides to come, adaptation and resiliency to sea level rise, and then also to increase biodiversity and interconnectivity throughout the shoreline restoration and native plantings for the basin. There's an image on the right that shows connection just behind our project, our public housing that kind of dot this large hillside. And one of the key components to our project, we're really connecting the residents of that hill down to the waterfront, an area that was never accessible to the public until we purchased that property in 2014. Next. A quick project overview. So here's a conceptual diagram of the project. The 900 Innes site is at the bottom of this image on the right, and then India Basin Shoreline Park is the larger park aspect. Components of the project include renovation of a historic shipwrights cottage that was built in 1870. We have new buildings, a food pavilion, a shop building, a restroom building, a new boathouse with a pier, and then a maintenance building for our rec park operations. There's a large marineway lawn and walks that take people down to the water. New basketball courts, playground, and adult fitness area. Also included are new piers with a dock and gangways that go out to access the water. Marineway rails are a historic component of the project, as well as interpretive and wayfinding signage and public art. We're also expanding the Bay Trail and paths throughout the site and making a direct connection from the PG&E shoreline, which is next door to our property, to some India Basin open space area, connecting the Bay Trail throughout this India Basin area. And lastly, new plantings, new trees, and shoreline restoration along the entire corridor. Next. Here's some images of our 900 Innes site pre-remediation. As you can see, there was a dilapidated buildings from the shipbuilding era of the early 1900s. There was a lot of concrete that had been poured out there, and just kind of a rundown and dilapidated site. Next. And then here's a before and after of our 900 Innes site. So 900 Innes site is directly in the middle of the photo, and then the India Basin Shoreline Park, which we'll be renovating and connecting to the site, is to the right of the photo. And if you look on the left, you can see the piers and concrete that came out and kind of filled the bay. And then on the right, this is where we're taking out a temporary water barrier that we put across the bay so that we could do our remediation efforts and remove about 2 to 5 feet of contaminated sediments and then backfill it with clean fill. And then this is the image showing where we release the bay back into the basin. So a nice clean site. Next. And then lastly, I'll hand it over to Josh, and then there's a rendering here of the final project with the 900 Innes site in the kind of middle left, and then the larger green area is the India Basin Shoreline Park. And then a couple other components that I just wanted to mention in terms of contracting. The city has a very strict contracting program, and within that we included our city local hiring requirements, which was determined by our contract monitoring division. We had a workforce development component within our project. All of our projects have to comply with the citywide PLA. And then this was kind of a unique project for us in our department, is we did a best value contract instead of a low bid contract. So that means we, on top of the bid price that the contractor submitted with their bid, they also had to answer a handful of questions that were then scored by a panelist and weighed with their bid price, so that we ended up getting what we call the best value instead of just the low bid. So those were a couple of contracting things that we did differently on this project. And with that, I'll pass it over to Josh Silver.
Was there going to be a question period first, or should I go ahead? Okay, could you advance to the next slide, please?
We do have, sorry, this
Okay,
is
it's okay.
Marilyn. I do see a question from Yoon Boon. I might be getting that wrong. What is the process for local nonprofit organizations to get involved in these projects?
Local nonprofits in terms of what type of, I guess I would need clarification on what type of work.
You know, that might be a general question related to Evan's presentation on the tip sheet. Or it might be directed to, you know, your presentation here, David. So let's try to welcome a follow-up question. And, you know, I know later in our presentation, we'll certainly talk about the nonprofits that are engaged in your projects. I don't know if you want to speak to ongoing opportunities for additional groups to get involved.
I think that's something. I was going to say, I
David.
think that's something that Josh can cover in his equitable development plan kind of overview in the next slides to come.
Yeah, I think Jackie and I can answer that question, but there are many different ways in which nonprofit organizations, including Jackie, who is with APRI, the A. Philip Randolph Institute, are involved, as are the San Francisco Parks Alliance. But as part of the equitable development plan, and I'll speak to this more in a moment, there are many different nonprofit or community-based organizations that are engaged in this endeavor. And that is really because of the equitable development plan and the investments back into the community. And so I think maybe an answer to that question will emerge when I go ahead and give my presentation. So let me say, my name is Josh Silver. You can see my name on the screen. I am a program manager at the San Francisco Recreation and Parks Department. And it's thanks for the invitation to be here today for the webinar, and always a pleasure to join my colleagues who we all work very closely together on this. What I want to pack into my maybe 20 minutes I have here or less is an overview of the project's Equitable Development Plan, or EDP, which is a really important and complementary piece to what was the design and the construction, and which David just referred to in his presentation. If you could advance to the next slide, please. So a little bit of an overview, you know, for those of you maybe less familiar with San Francisco, but even more specifically, this neighborhood, the Bayview Hunters Point neighborhood. This is over, as David had mentioned, in Southeast San Francisco. But the point of this is really to explain, if you look at the community profile, which is how diverse and multicultural this community really is. It is a community that trends younger. There's a higher percentage of subsidized housing and lower income. But I'd also like to make a point here, as you can see on the map on the left, which is that this is a community that has been cut off, you know, from the rest of the city by 2 highways. It is a location where things were put or maybe successfully fought against in other parts, wealthier parts of the city, such as the Pacific Gas and Electric plant, or a trash and recycling depot. So, you know, some of the things that are important here are that this neighborhood is, despite some of these things, is a very rich cultural neighborhood, a lot of passion and a lot of energy that they've put into this particular project and what I'm about to talk about, which is the Equitable Development Plan. Next slide, please. So what you see here are what I refer to as sort of 4 community values, or sort of pillars, which have served as drivers for the project, both during the community engagement as it related to the design part of it, but certainly in implementation of the Equitable Development Plan. And this is about the project partners being transparent with the community, but also ensuring that whether it's a design feature, reflects what we heard through engagement or other programs and investments that we're making really nest in sort of these four pillars or these four values that you see on the screen. And I will add here too that, this is a really historic moment for this community. This is, a historic moment for environmental justice. This is the transformation of what is really a dilapidated relic of industrial shipwrights era into a 21st century park with an emphasis on public access, social equity, resilience, and restoration. Next slide, please. But to address some of these things, and as part of this, as I mentioned, as a complementary piece is something called an Equitable Development Plan, or EDP. And what you see here are 6 areas of focus that emerged through an extensive community engagement that Jackie and her organization, the A. Philip Randolph Institute, were instrumental in spearheading and in facilitating and leading. And it was about a 2-year process to develop this equitable development plan. And as I said, it's really complementary to the project design and the construction, but has a real intentional focus on community development. And so the EDP is about supporting the project is itself. It's about preventing further displacement of people that live and work in this community. It's about acknowledging and correcting historic and systemic environmental injustices. And it's about a way to invest back into the community to provide sustained resources, that will help support community organizing, capacity building, and decision-making efforts. And lastly, it's about leveraging the park as a catalyst, for environmental remediation and regeneration. So under each of these areas of focus are specific strategies and initiatives or actions. And together, the project partners working very closely with the community and something referred to as an Equitable Development Leadership Committee that we work to provide guidance to the project. We're working toward implementing some of these strategies and initiatives. What I'd like to highlight today specifically, just in a few minutes, is the workforce and business development aspect of this, for which you're going to hear a lot more momentarily from both Jackie and Janet, who play a big role in that particular part. Next slide, please. But why is an equitable development plan critical to the project's success? You sort of now have a better understanding of the location of this and some of the challenges. But also, change is happening in this community, whether it's directly adjacent to the park or within close proximity within the park's walkshed. There's a lot of new development that is happened, is continuing to happen. David mentioned in an adjacent parcel where there's going to be another new development in a park that will expand the green space in the community. There's been new transportation infrastructure that has been added not too far away from the park. And so there's a lot of change that is happening. And one of the things that, by way of the community engagement piece of this, that was quickly elevated was this topic or subject of green displacement. And so in order to mitigate and or potentially prevent some green displacement from happening, that's one of the many reasons why an equitable development plan has been incorporated into this process. Next slide, please. So workforce and business development, these are 2 distinct things under the same area of focus. The workforce piece, I'm not going to talk a lot about, because you're going to hear more again from Janet and Jackie momentarily about how that relates to the actual construction of the project. If you go to the next slide, please. But I wanted to give a couple specific examples here of the strategies and initiatives that we're working on. And not only are we partnered together with the Office of Economic and Workforce Development with Janet and to lean into an existing city program to provide job training and placement for construction jobs that are actually part of the project. But this isn't just about building a park for a couple years. This is about more of a long-term and sustainable jobs that we would like to see as part of this initiative. And one of the many ways that we're hoping to be able to do that is, I want to give a really concrete example, is that we've made an investment into a nonprofit organization in the community to help guide the process for the future operations of some of these spaces that David mentioned in his presentation. And one in particular is a food pavilion that is part of this. But this isn't just a food pavilion where one might go to get a concession at a park. This is going to be really developed around specific programming, around culinary skill training, job training for whether it's the operations of that space or other jobs in the food and hospitality sector. We also, as David mentioned, the bid packages for contracting and subcontracting have also moved forward with the idea of hiring people from within the community to work on this project. Next slide, please. Thank you. And Jackie and Janet will talk a little bit more about some of the professional developments as it relates to construction. I mentioned some things as it relates to operations of the park itself. But there are a number of different avenues in which we're pursuing to try to ensure that people from this community have employment. But one other thing I wanted to highlight is not just about workforce, but business development. Earlier this year, we invested in a Bayview-based nonprofit organization called Family Equity Partners, who is going to be leading just over a year-long program around Black business and entrepreneurship. And this will be a combination of both virtual and in-person business training around business finance and marketing and communications, but also will be using the park itself to host a monthly programming and events about how to support Black businesses, feature Black businesses, and create networking opportunities, and help some of these emerging businesses better understand how to navigate, some of the bureaucratic processes of working, with other on government contracts, on government grants, and those types of things. And so that's an exciting new program that is part of a strategy and initiative that we're implementing. Next slide, please. Just a few things to highlight as it relates to the Equitable Development Plan. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I want to mention a couple of them. The top right image is a program that we are working with the Bayview-based YMCA. It goes without saying, as you now know, we're building a park that is on the water, and there's boating, and there's a beach, water access, and piers, and we want to ensure youth in particular feel safe around the water or when in the water. And so by way of a partnership with the YMCA, there is the Bayview Swim and Splash program, which is a water safety and swimming program. And to date, since about 2 years now, we've trained around 400 youth who now meet Red Cross Level 1 water safety. There's other things that are more just about bringing people together. The Sounds of the Street, a music event, an arts and culture event that happened out at the park last year, a series of 6 music events featuring a combination of local and city wide and even some regional musicians to bring people together to just have fun and celebrate and activate the space. The bottom left of the screen is a community storytelling initiative that we did as part of Black History Month. Some of those stories we are going to use as part of the visitor experience, interpretive experience in what is the visitor center of the historic Shipwrights Cottage, which David mentioned in his presentation. We also are partnered with the city's Office of Financial Empowerment for a smart money coaching, a financial literacy program. Maybe some things that you all on this webinar take for granted about, how to create or open a savings account, how to remove bad debt from a credit card, how to create a family budget. This is a year-long pilot program that we're working with a nonprofit organization to help provide financial literacy and coaching to Bayview, Hunters Point individuals and families. Next slide, please. So some things that we're starting this year in 2024, and some things I think that we're looking forward to working toward implementing as part of the Equitable Development Plan is an artist in residency program, which is a partnership with the San Francisco Arts Commission, which will be working with 2 community artists that will be embedded into the project, which will help expand and extend our engagement and amplify other opportunities as it relates to the park. We're hoping to launch a boat building program, which is also something that is reflects the history and the culture of this community. And I mentioned about the food pavilion piece, where we're looking to develop a number of different workforce and skill-based programming around culinary and hospitality. We've just invested in 4 community-based organizations who do youth programming in the Bayview that are going to be leading their own programming at the park for the next year. We're also looking to reinvigorate, which is a program that has gone a little bit dormant, which is a park prescription program about increasing physical activity and health and wellness in the community, but also looking at another emerging best practice about how to help individuals and families reduce medical debt, which is a big issue in particular. So these are just a few of examples of some of the other things that we're looking to implement in 2024. Next slide, please. So to do all this work isn't cheap. This is a $200 million park project. You can kind of see the breakdown here of where some of the funding has come from. But what I want to mention is the Equitable Development Plan investment. And so as part of this $200 million investment, $15 million of it are being invested by way of the Equitable Development Plan back into the community through a number of these things that I just highlighted on both the previous 2 slides, in addition to many other programs as well, as including workforce and business development. Next slide. So with that, I think it brings us to the end of my part of the presentation. I think we have a little lag on the slides, but there was a thank you slide there, and that's okay. And thank you for your time today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Josh. We do have a couple questions, so let's just take a little bit of time. First one from the chat from LaDonna Williams. I think this could be for either David or Josh. How safe is this area for low-income housing residents? He mentioned 2 to 5 feet of remediation, so this site possesses a risk to the public accessing the site. I assume 900 Innes is what she's referring to.
Yes, yeah, so I can answer that. So the site is safe for all residents. Part of our remediation project, we did testing on the site. So just to be clear, this site is not associated with the Naval Hunters Point shipyard. This was a boat building site for schooner ships, which are flat bottom boats that help transport goods in the early 1900s. The contaminants that were in the sediments, not in the water, were higher levels of mercury, lead, and metals. And so as part of our remediation efforts, which were overseen by the California Water Boards and the EPA, we removed approximately 2 to 5 feet of contaminated sediments across the entire site. We off-hauled those and disposed them in disposal facilities. And we brought in clean fill from a virgin quarry in the East Bay of California and put those on top of where we excavated. So, and one other thing to note is that we excavated to the depth that was needed, where tests showed that there was no contaminants that exceeded threshold levels. So the site from the EPA and the Water Board and the city's perspective is clean and safe for anyone to access.
Thanks, David. All right. The next question actually looks like it's more for the Conservancy, so I'll save that for the end. And I believe Marilyn's putting an answer in now, so we can proceed with Jackie's presentation.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Jackie Flynn. I run the A. Philip Randolph Institute San Francisco, and we're one of the nonprofit partners that work on the India Basin Waterfront Park Development Project. We are the community-based nonprofit that works with the project, and I hope that Josh and David were able to give you an idea of how this neighborhood is a little different than what most people think of when they think of San Francisco. As Josh mentioned, we're sort of isolated by 2 freeways. And of course, we're impacted by the decades of industrial usages that the majority of our community has been impacted by. And so, as you can imagine, community engagement is essential for park projects or any projects in this neighborhood to be successful. One of the challenges that we've experienced working with government in the past is a ton of broken promises. So it was extremely important for us to develop trust within the neighborhood way before programs started. And that is why I had the huge opportunity to work with the Parks Department and our other nonprofit partners to develop our equitable development plan with community. So I think the first most important point that we're making is that community engagement starts at the very early stages of the project. And I think I have another slide, so I'll ask to advance the slide here. Okay, and so as we began to look at the magnitude of this project happening in this neighborhood, we also wanted to keep in mind the context of the neighborhood. As we mentioned, there's a ton of social health determinants that are characteristic of this neighborhood, including higher asthma rates, higher health impacts due to some of the industrial uses. And quite frankly, we had the most concentration of public housing adjacent to this park project throughout the city. So we're working in a neighborhood that historically has had challenges with communication, with building trust. And so one of the reasons why my organization began to partner with this project was because as community advocates, we saw that community members that actually represented the majority of the folks that lived in the neighborhood weren't initially participating in some of the meetings. And of course, when you think about it, we're building a great park. San Francisco has really wonderful spaces throughout the city. But one of the questions that had come up within our community was, why now? And it's a $200 million investment. There can be so many effective ways to use that funding. How is it going to benefit the community that exists there today? So it was very important for us to assemble a team of community leaders from all different socioeconomic backgrounds to help define what equity is. And I saw a really great question in the chat about, as we define equity, which is a very complicated term, what does that mean for the folks that you're building equity for? And so for us, it was very important that community members actually engaged in the process of defining equity. And that's where we developed our sort of 6 areas of focus, where we saw opportunity to build equity within the community. And that is where the investments around the equitable development plan are heading. So for us, our outreach and recruitment actually started very early on. And some of the programs that you see helped inform what our community wanted, what our community needed. But as we got into workforce development, knowing that this project was just about to break ground and get started, there was also a huge opportunity to leverage the network of the apprenticeship trades program, as well as existing workers in the community to find opportunity to work on this space. So what we actually did was we worked within a huge network of nonprofit partners that do workforce development in the community to extend our opportunity to as many folks that were interested, really hoping that we'd identify folks that we say live right on that hill to work on the project, and not just on the project, but become certified tradesmen and women that could work on projects throughout the region. So what we actually did was we did more of the traditional outreach approaches where, of course, you send out email blasts, you post up flyers, but knowing how challenging sometimes this community is to connect with, we actually thought it was very important to engage a network of folks that work within the community to offer the opportunity to anybody interested. So folks that were already providing employment development services, you know, family support services. They were all informed about the opportunity. And what we would do is actually host different orientations and workshops throughout the community, meeting people where they were to inform people about the opportunity. Originally, we were able to create an initial cohort of very enthusiastic participants, but even then we found challenges with that because if you're already struggling to make ends meet and you're really trying to break into the workforce, it can be challenging to participate in a 8 to 10, sometimes 16-week training period where you're not being paid, but you are developing the skills for your future job. That balance was very difficult for many participants. So of course, over time, we had to figure out ways to incentivize participating in the program. In addition to that, and I'm sure my partner Janet with OEWD will get into a little bit more detail, there are multiple barriers to employment, especially coming from low-income communities, whether it's criminal justice histories, having a valid driver's license, or even having something as basic as your high school diploma or GED equivalent. So addressing and resolving many of those barriers were things that we had to do prior to them actually qualifying to move forward into the workforce training program. So what we actually did was offer job readiness services, meeting individuals again where they are, taking them through an assessment process that helped us identify what barriers our candidates may have and allowed us an opportunity to address and resolve some of those barriers to successfully support them through the workforce development program. That was actually a 1-week training program where many of their soft skills were addressed. And again, identifying any barriers from, as I had mentioned, your driver's license, or even things like childcare. Other barriers included things like if you really did not have enough money to get groceries at the end of the day, you're not going to come into the program as prepared as you can be. And so some of the things that we also included were gift cards for groceries and transportation. Once their job readiness program was completed, they were then referred to our partners at OEWD and selected for the workforce development program. Again, just getting folks aware of the program is important, but supporting our workforce participants throughout the program is also extremely important to be able to retain them. Once they were able to complete the program, and Janet will talk a little bit more about the program specifically, again, thinking about how to retain them and how to create an environment where they have a supportive network if they do face challenges on the job were important. So our staff continued to work directly with individuals, providing case management services, and really just checking in periodically to provide any additional support for their success once on the project. So we've been extremely successful at, reaching out, working with many community partners, working under different platforms to provide community engagement. We actually did have to adapt a bit. This is, a new century with new technology. And of course, social media became a much larger platform for us to share information on. So, of course, we had our traditional means of outreach. We even did a lot of in-person outreach. But one of the things that we actually developed out and we see a lot of success in is using our social media platforms and being able to share information with a network of folks that use social media. As we began to see some of our numbers increase with interest and move toward more individuals interested in the actual program, We still wanted to make sure that, again, everything we did was really tailored for the needs of individuals. And many individuals had different, challenges with their path to successful employment. And one of the important things for us was, of course, getting folks into family sustainable jobs. So I think I see Evan's hand up. I'm getting a time check, and I want to make sure I can provide enough time to pass this over to my partner, Janet.
Thank you so much. And there is a great question from Clayton Tishuti in the chat. If maybe David or Josh or others could try to answer it, since we're running a little bit behind. I wasn't doing a great job of our time check. All right, take it away, Janet. Thank you, Jackie.
So good morning, everyone. Once again, my name is Janet Gomes. I work with the Office of Economic and Workforce Development as an operations manager. So slides. There we go. Next. So this is some of the preliminary design work that actually Jackie was referencing. There's just two things I want to go ahead and point on this slide is the participant oral interviews. So at the conclusion of the 5-day job readiness training, what we strategically did was to go ahead and bring in the general contractor to go ahead and participate in this process to actually to build ownership. Okay, with this initiative. And then to the selection process, there's a series of required documents that our office required, as well as making sure that they were able to pass a drug test. And then a part of it, like I said previously, was the oral interviewing process. So just wanted to go ahead and share that. Next slide. Okay, so get into the meat of the 4-week actual training program. So the first week really focused on soft skills training, which was led by APRI. And the soft skills training really consisted of physical training, so doing PE every morning, because when we're talking about construction, people need to have their stamina together. Team building exercises, an apprenticeship directory, which is a directory that lists out all the different trades and all the different requirements, as well as the wage. Then it also included how to read a tape measure, emotional intelligence, sexual harassment, and oral and interviewing mock interviews. The second week was really focused, and this is where I retained a union instructor from Local 22, the laborers union, which included the CPR first aid, confined space awareness, traffic control, as well as basic construction fundamentals. Okay, so then the third and fourth week was really what I call, it's the hands-on type training, which was also led by the union instructor. What we were able to do as a part of this 4-week program is to actually have the contractors come in to go ahead and interview the participants as a way for them to go ahead and select who they think was a best fit for their company versus us saying, guess what, here's who you're getting. Okay. And then after, individuals were selected for sponsorship, then it was getting the trainees indentured into the union to union career jobs. Next slide, please. And then just to touch on some of the successes, and Jackie referenced some of this, is while they were going through the 4-week training program, they received $500 a week. We also were able to go ahead and finance the basic set of tools, uniforms, safety gear, the union initiation fees, as well as some of the supportive services that Jackie referenced beforehand. I would say another success was our partnership with APRI and Rec Park. We met twice a month for an hour, and it was just an opportunity for us to build I know for me is build a relationship with Rec Park specifically because I had a previous relationship with APR, but really to go ahead and talk about what's working, what doesn't work, data, what's on the horizon, etc. I thought that was very successful. And then as I mentioned previously, is getting contractors involved in this process, I think was huge because that buys into ownership. And then for me, I would say another success you'll see down, but I'll leave it at the end. Some of the challenges that we did experience is, periodically, some of the scope of work would go ahead. Well, the work would get a little bit delayed. So that kind of, when it comes to placements, okay, the expectation is people will go ahead and get hired immediately. Well, sometimes that did not occur. Data, and I would say data, the data tracking, I think some of that really had to do with, I know I very much operated on a fiscal year, but when the funders, it was more on, it was off. It wasn't a fiscal year, it wasn't even a calendar year. So that was a little bit complicated. Post-program retention. Yes, it is built in into the budget as it was for 90 days, but 90 days is not long enough, okay? Especially for brand new apprentices into the union, it can be quite challenging and daunting. I've already said before is it's just so important, the timing of the work. Okay, you want to make sure is that your training is completed and within 2 weeks tops is that people actually in construction in the trades. And then if I go to, I'm just going to reference some of the outcomes. So we did have 14 people that were enrolled in the 4-week training program. 12 graduated. And then out of that, we had 6 individuals were sponsored as labor apprentices with Local 261. One individual was sponsored as a drywall pre-apprentice / stocker scrapper. And then, because let me kind of back up just a little bit more. So the commitment was from the general contractor is to go ahead and have 10 individuals sponsored. Okay. Unfortunately, timing of the projects, not everybody was able to go ahead and work on the job site. So they had to work at other locations. And on top of that, 2 individuals, two carpenter slots were set aside for individuals who were already indentured into the union. And that really was a good faith effort because the out of work list for Local 22 is so large. Okay. So if we step back and look at how many people actually graduated and how many real sponsorship opportunities, we did not have enough. So what we were able to do is actually bring in another contractor doing tree maintenance work, and they were able to go ahead and sponsor 3 of those individuals. And then one individual actually chose to go ahead and do non-union work because they were learning how to do some welding. So for me is if we look at just those numbers, these numbers of replacement for the second cohort, 83%, I don't think it's I think it's quite good. So that's my part of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Janet. Great. So we do have some time for Q&A. So please go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A. I see Josh is typing in an answer. Would you like to speak to what you're typing?
Yeah, I can. Thank you. Thank you, Erin. Yeah, it is. It's a hard question to answer over Zoom, but thank you, Clayton, for your question. I would say that the subject, of course, of gentrification and displacement is a complex one. It's obviously goes without saying it's been studied for a very long time, and lots of think tanks have written white papers about it. But what I would say in this case, as it relates to this particular project, this is a best practice. There aren't any other local government park projects that also have an equitable development plan. So I would say having something like an equitable development plan in place is certainly a good first step for, or to aid in helping not prevent, but mitigate displacement, which then leads to gentrification. I also would add that, in displacement and gentrification, don't occur overnight. They occur over time. At this point, we have a project that is still incomplete. We have a equitable development plan that is just a couple years old. So really what we need to be doing, and we are doing, is we're measuring, the impacts of these investments and how they're working over a medium and long-term time frame, which is actually many years, to understand whether or not they did in fact address displacement to begin with. So I hope that's helpful.
Thanks, Josh. I'm not seeing any additional questions at the moment, but since Jackie gave such a fantastic answer in the Q&A, I will welcome you to speak to Jillian's question. And maybe I'll repeat it. I'm not sure. I believe everyone has access to the Q&A as an attendee, but Jillian's question is, can you speak about the approach that was taken during the job readiness assessment process? Through our workforce development initiative, we have found when working with sensitive populations, trust building along the way and barriers and needs are not always discovered until the participant is comfortable and reached a level of trust with the organization.
Yeah, and I just commented back that that is absolutely right. That is the case for the majority of the folks that we actually work with. And the reason why it's so important that you have to start with such a large pool of candidates in the very beginning, which is why the community engagement piece is so essential, that you're really tapping into all the resources of service providers and folks that are already helping work with individuals looking for sustainable jobs. For us, it was extremely important to develop relationships with individuals, but just as a background with our organization has been doing services in the neighborhood, literally going door to door for over 20 years. So we've developed years of trust with community leaders and individuals that are already within the community. That's kind of the first important layer of building trust with individuals. And then, of course, you open your doors, you allow folks to come in and they say, hey, I'm interested in this project. But it is very difficult to disclose any barriers or challenges that they may have been facing. It takes a huge amount of trust to go to someone and ask for help. And so that is what we see with individuals. Now, I wouldn't say that everyone, just like you said, discloses everything in the very beginning. So over time, as we go through our assessment process, we do identify additional barriers. And sometimes individuals don't even know that things are barriers, like childcare. They just assume that people are supposed to be able to take care of their children and figure out solutions, but they don't realize that when you're already really struggling, that is a very important and very expensive issue that needs to be addressed before they could successfully go through a program. So for us, the case managers that have a good amount of experience working with our community are important. And our organization really targets hiring from within the community. So it's kind of like making sure that the people that they're speaking to understand them, can relate to them, and speak their language, which helps, again, develop that trust. While not every candidate is successful in moving forward with the workforce development program, we are often very successful identifying barriers that can be addressed. And even if they don't move forward with the workforce development construction program, there might be other alternative options that we can refer them to and continue to support them on their journey. They just don't necessarily end up in construction. And one other thing to note is construction is very specific, right? You got to be willing to work outdoors. You got to be willing to work early hours, sometimes late hours, and you got to be willing to work in environment that is ebb and flow, right? Sometimes construction is big and heavy and going, and then it can slow down, especially in the winter. So it's just important to note that it's not an easy fit for everyone, but it was an option that we thought was really great because our city had already invested in these apprenticeship trade pathways, and we were just leveraging the resources that OEWD offered for this project.
Thank you so much, Jackie. And we're at 12 o'clock. There are a few more questions about partnering with you all in the Q&A. I welcome you to respond in the chat. We'll keep the Zoom open for a minute or two to allow our speakers to do that. But really just want to thank our speakers for presenting today and providing such great examples and guidance for our grantees and our agency. So thanks everyone. I really appreciate you coming, and we will post the recording of this webinar on our website.
Thanks so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.